my name is Leslie Eccles and welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to share with you how to make my great-grandmother's bread. This is a recipe that I used to come home to as a little girl, and my mom would have been baking bread all day and the smell was so fabulous, and we would just come home, 8 kids, and we would probably devour practically all 4 loaves that she made that day, had spent all day making. But bread making is a neat tradition in our family, and it has come down handed from mother to daughter. But I have to say that when I was first married, I did not make bread like my mom. I did it the quick way, 3 hours, and that was enough for me. My mom's bread goes through about 4 risings, and I just thought that was way too much. Over the years, though, I realized bread that is risen many times is better for our bodies. Because I make everything from scratch and bread almost every day, my kids and my husband and myself became gluten intolerant. So I learned the lesson the hard way that sometimes the long way is the better way. So that is what I'm going to share with you today, how to make my great-grandma's bread. The amazing thing is, even though my family has all these gluten problems now, they can eat this bread. So that's what's so exciting about it. My great-grandmother, she, in the 1900s, and my great-grandfather, they owned a bakery in Manti, Utah. And it was a very successful bakery, and they made this bread by scratch, by hand, every day. And my grandmother also made it for her family. And so this is the recipe I'm going to share today. Plus, I'm going to share a few adaptations if you want to make it a little bit easier. But I'm going to show you the way my grandma did it. So we'll get started over here. First, we're going to use potato water. And potato water has a little bit of starch in it, and it also has a little bit of salt in it. The right temperature for water is, if you put it on your wrist, you can't feel it. If it's too cold, you want it warmer, and if it's too hot, you want to let it cool down a bit. Yeast is really sensitive. It's a live thing, and so you want to make sure that it's just right. So we're going to add about a cup of water, and it doesn't really matter the amount, but and then the yeast, it's not really that important either how much you add. I'm going to show you a couple variations on it. My grandma's recipe called for about 2.5 teaspoons. So that's what I'm going to do today. But I want to share with you something. If you don't want to use a lot of yeast and you want to wake up in the morning to bread like this, and it's all risen and everything, and you want to make donuts or scones, you can just put everything together the night before, knead it, set it aside, and this only has a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast in it, and it just grew all night. So you can see it's lovely. So I just wanted to share that with you. And then she also put in the recipe, if you want bread faster, like in 3 hours, you can double the yeast. You can put 5 teaspoons of yeast in. So yeast is kind of important, and it's kind of not important, but you can just use it however, it's a vehicle. You can use it however, for whatever purposes you want. Sugar, she did 2 heaping teaspoons, which I measured out is 3 tablespoons, but you can see that's a little bit of a time saver. If you don't want to go to the trouble of doing potato water, what I often do is instead I will add in a 1/3 cup of potato flakes. So I did the potato flour, so I'm not going to add that, but I just wanted to offer that to you as an alternative of what you could do. Now this salt is also very important. Her recipe calls for a tablespoon of salt, but if you didn't put salt in the potato water like she did, you're going to need to do a 1.5 tablespoons of salt. Otherwise, it just doesn't taste like it should, I think. I think bread kind of needs the right amount of salt. So this recipe calls for 2 eggs, and you can let them come to room temperature if you want or not, but the important thing about what she did was in the olden days, yeast was very precious, so she would put a little bit of the sugar and the yeast together in the water, warm water, and let it start to foam up. If you make a lot of bread or you keep your yeast in the freezer like I do, you know it's good, so you really don't have to go through that first step, but I'm just doing it because that's what she did. But when I make bread myself, I actually add all the liquid in together, and I don't worry about it because I know my yeast is good. The recipe calls for 6 tablespoons of shortening, and she did like 3 heaping tablespoons, so I'm just assuming that's like kind of like double. She used either butter or shortening. They both taste wonderful. And then 5 pounds of flour. So I measured out 5 pounds of flour, and it is 19 cups, and this is 19 cups right here. So I'm going to start to mix this up a little bit and break up the eggs and the butter a little bit. It's nice and soft. And also I'm going to add in, kind of go back and forth. We'll add a little bit of flour and a little bit of the other liquid. But she just kind of added it as she went, and because it's all by hand, when I do it in my mixer, of course, I just dump everything together and the mixer takes care of it and it kneads it beautifully. But when you're doing it by hand, it's a little more time intensive. So here I have 2 cups of milk, and it should be warm milk. And the same test on your wrist, because yeast is so delicate, you don't want to do it too hot or else it will taste yeasty. And there again, it doesn't matter how much yeast you add or how little yeast you add, it depends on the temperature of your water or your liquids. So you want to make sure they're just warm, and that'll give the perfect environment for yeast to grow. Then, so you're just going to keep adding, and she, in her recipe, she would add about 5 cups of flour at the beginning and then just stir it until it was too hard to stir, and then she would start kneading it in. And I'm going to show you how to knead today too, because I think that's a really important thing to know how to do. In this day and age, we pretty much want to just use our bread makers and our mixers, and that's all really great, but there might come a day when, who knows, we might not have that, so we need to know how to do it by hand too. So just keep adding the flour in, and I really like this big wide bowl because then I'm not getting flour all over my counter. You could do it on your counter though, totally. And there's another thing that I like to do when I roll the dough out is I like to just put shortening on the counter and not the flour, because I don't like to clean up the flour. You can see this is getting a little bit hard to stir. So this is when my grandma would start adding in the flour and kneading by hand. So I will do that. And my mom used to just say the flour measurement isn't that important either. The important thing is that the texture of the dough is just right. So we are going to just knead it until it's the right texture. And what you want is not too wet, because if it's too wet, it's hard for the dough to hold its rise. And if it's too dry, then it's hard for the dough to rise also, because it doesn't have enough elasticity to get that beautiful double rise that it needs to make it taste so good. Bread is very flexible and very precise. The ingredients are flexible, but the technique and the texture of the dough is probably the most important thing. My mom used to say she liked kneading bread when she was wanting to get out some aggression or anger. She said it just made her feel good to knead bread for 10 minutes. That didn't ever sound so very appealing to me, but you know what? It probably gives us nice, strong, we can look at it as a workout. Give us nice, strong muscles. This is the way you want to knead your bread for about 10 minutes. So set your timer and make sure that it is all kneaded. I'm not going to knead it for 10 minutes here. I'm going to show you as you knead it, you will incorporate more flour, and it's wet on the inside, so as you knead it, it's just going to get more and more beautiful. It's going to be this beautiful dough. So I'm going to try to get some of this off of my hands so I can show you what a beautifully kneaded dough looks like after 10 minutes. So I'll put this off to the side. Let's see, right here. And this is what you'll get after 10 minutes. So it's a beautiful dough. You can tell this was had gone through another rise. It is not too sticky and not too not too dry. It's just perfect. So this is the kind of dough that you want, and when you poke it, it kind of pops back a little bit. I mean, you can still see where you poked it, but it is definitely, the gluten in the bread has developed to the point where it is very elastic. So this does have gluten in it, but because it's gone through so many rises, the yeast has digested it, and so, like I said, my family is fine with this. There's many things that she would do with her bread. She would sometimes do 4 loaves, and I love the stainless steel loaf pans. I think they're awesome. She would also do 1 pan of dinner rolls for dinner and another pan of cinnamon rolls for breakfast. So I'm going to show you how she would roll out her dough, because it's really important to get all the air bubbles out. So this, last night I did half a recipe, so this is good for 2 loaves. And get out our rolling pin, and you just want to make sure you get all, you can hear maybe the air bubbles coming out. And then that just makes it so that when you put your butter and your jelly on your slice of bread, you don't have a big hole in your bread. It doesn't affect the taste at all, just the way it looks on the inside. And so, see, and this is just perfect. If you want to do dinner rolls, you just put a little butter and brown sugar on it, roll it up and slice it, and you put them in a muffin tin and make beautiful dinner rolls. Or you could do the butter and the cinnamon and put them, I also like putting them in pie tins like this. It looks really pretty too. But I'll show you how to do the loaf. So you just roll it, get all the air bubbles out, and then you just roll it really tight, and like that. And this is going to be a little bit of a smaller loaf because I didn't divide it completely in half, but that will be fine. And kind of make sure that you grease your pan and then put a little bit of grease on top. And what the grease does, it keeps the dough all nice and soft on top, so that it doesn't, if it gets a hard outer shell, then it won't rise either. So you set this, I just put it in the oven and do it on time bake, but you could put it in a fairly warm place, let it rise for another hour, and then bake it. And then you end up with this lovely loaf of bread. You put a little butter on top to give it a nice bloom. And then my mom would always, when it would come out of the oven, she would let it rest 10 minutes and then take it out of the loaf pan, and she would put it on its side, and probably better to use a knife, but she would put it on its side and then cover it with a nice cloth. I don't know why, but that's what she did. She would cover it with a cloth, and then when we got home, we could eat this beautiful bread. And this recipe makes so many loaves, but look at this. You can get these bags like at Smart and Final or probably any cooking place, and you put your bread in bags and freeze them. And if you have a day that you didn't have time to bake, or you want to give something to your visiting teacher or somebody else, you've got them right in your freezer, and you get to enjoy them anytime. Thank you so much for joining me, and I have learned a lot from making my mom's bread, my great-grandma's bread the right way, and I love sharing bread with people, and it's a wonderful thing, and my kids love to make bread, and I hope my grandkids do too someday. Thank you for joining me. This